is up with all these bad games attacking the castle all the time? I don't get it.
They must have saw the reviews you did of them and all their buddies and decided to gain up on you and try to wipe you off the face of the internet.
Yeah, well, whatever. You know what? What will put me in a better mood is if we do a review of a really, really great game. And I can't decide if I want to do like a Final Fantasy game or a Dragon Quest game. Those are really great series.
Well, maybe you could review both series by playing one game.
What are you talking about?
Well, back in the 90s there was a collaborative effort between the makers of the Dragon Quest series and the Final Fantasy series. It's regarded as one of the best games of all time by some people.
Oh, you mean Chrono Trigger? Yeah, we could totally do a review of Chrono Trigger. I think everybody would like that, right? People have been asking for it. Let's do it. Chrono Trigger was originally released in 1995 and created by Square's Dream Team division, which was led by Hironobu Sakaguchi, who created the Final Fantasy series. The game was written by scenario writers Yuji Hori, who was the creator of the Dragon Quest games, and Masato Kato, who later directed both Radical Dreamers and Crono Cross, the sequels to Chrono Trigger. He also wrote much of the Xenogears and XenoSaga 1 and 2. Assisting him with concept art was character designer Akira Toriyama, who is primarily known for Dragon Ball and all of his Dragon Quest concept art. All of the game's music was composed primarily by Yasunori Mitsuda, who would be later known for his breathtaking music in Xenogears, Crono Cross, and the XenoSaga games. And he was supervised under the watchful eye of Nobuo Uematsu, who is best known for his Final Fantasy music. As a result of this combination of legendary talent, there are some ardent fans of this game who believe that Chrono Trigger is the best game ever made. And while I'm not sure if it's the best game ever made, I definitely think it's something special. Now, the version of Chrono Trigger I'm going to be reviewing is the re-release for the PlayStation 1 that was done in 1999, shortly before the sequel was released. This version has an anime opening sequence that has been added, and I swear when I play it the first time, I literally had tears in my eyes at how sweet it was. If there was ever a game created by Square which needed to be turned into an anime, it's Chrono Trigger. Sadly, this is probably the closest we will ever get to seeing What If. Although this re-release did not add as many anime sequences as I would have liked, some of the more memorable scenes in the game have had an anime sequence added, and it's worth playing through the game just to see them all. As for the actual game graphics, everything from the Super Nintendo release was retained for this PlayStation 1 release. Which is great because I believe that Chrono Trigger was one of the best looking games ever made on the Super Nintendo, and in its day, its graphics were totally top notch. Although the special effects do seem a bit dated today, Chrono Trigger was one of the few games in the Super NES that fully utilized the Nintendo's FX chip to allow vector graphics. These vector graphics were used heavily for special attacks, to great effect, and really did, in my opinion, have a lot of influence in the way that special attacks were designed in later Square and Enix games. As for the story, the game starts out with the teenage protagonist of the story, Crono, waking up in the morning, scaring his cat, and then running off to a town festival. From there, he meets a pretty tomboy of a girl named Marley, and then he meets up with his nerdy childhood friend Luca. After an experiment goes awry involving a prototype teleporter device, Marley is thrust back into the past and Crono sets out to save his new girlfriend. A quest that first sets out to avoid changing history and simply returning to your own timeline quickly transforms into an epic crusade to defeat a Lovecraftian super alien god of destruction who will eventually rise up and destroy the world. Your job is to make sure he never wakes up to start the apocalypse, and to do this you must travel into the future and the past to change the entire flow of time itself. Think of Zelda the Ocarina of Time on an acid trip, with lots of science fiction elements added to it. An above-average story with very memorable characters, Chrono Trigger deals with complicated moral issues like genocide, racism, human-like artificial intelligence, and fighting against destiny without patronizing the player. Many of the quests simply revolve around trying to help one of your party members deal with one of their deeply rooted problems, or in the case of Magus, save them from being consumed by their own hatred. That said, there are a few plot holes you have to ignore. For example, how does Luca, a girl born in 1000 AD, just happen to know what computers and robots are? I don't think Thomas Edison, who practically invented electricity, would know how to operate a computer or fix a robot if he lived to see one, but Luca can figure out how to repair and operate them within minutes. This is a little bit unbelievable. Anyway, throughout the course of the story, you'll travel to the prehistoric era to fight alongside cavemen, take part in a war against an evil wizard, free and enslave people from their utopian masters, and journey into the future to bring light to a dark era that might not even occur if you succeed in your ultimate quest of defeating Lavos, the super crazy whatever meteor god. An interesting aspect of a story is that what you choose to do in the game really does come into play later on, as what you do in the past directly impacts what happens in the future. This is most evident with the alternate endings, for at what stage of the game you choose to confront the final boss will determine the future of your world. That said, in order to advance in the story, you generally need to do some time traveling to influence the past or future by either speaking to someone, defeating someone, or bringing some event item which only existed in one era into another era in order to complete the quest. Now this is somewhat of a spoiler, but the merits of Chrono Trigger really cannot be fully discussed without saying so. As part of the storyline, the main character will die in the first encounter with the final boss. I can't speak for every gamer, but this event triggered deep emotions inside me, and as the point of the story I really felt something for the characters and had a personal interest in seeing Lavos defeated. I mean, really, how dare he kill the hero of the story? The hero of the story, your character's avatar. They kills him. And the way Crono sacrificed himself to defend his friends was truly heroic. Of course, Crono can be resurrected later on in the story if you want, but even those series events are very emotionally touching. But it's also worthy to note that Chrono Trigger is the kind of game that where even if the main character is dead, you can still beat the game without the revival of the central protagonist. The player is left with the decision whether or not to go on the side quest of reviving the fallen hero or not, and this is just one example of how non-linear the story is. As for the combat system, Chrono Trigger's battle engine relies heavily on the active time battle system developed for use in Final Fantasy IV, but really takes advantage of it in a way no other game produced by Square ever has. Characters in the party are capable of delivering what are called double and triple technique combo attacks, and these party attacks are a highlight of the game and help prevent battles from becoming too repetitive, as the player has many different aesthetically pleasing ways to defeat enemies. The battle engine is actually rather unique. Having no random battles, each encounter is usually initiated when the party confronts enemies on screen. The party members then quickly separate and surround the enemy right there on the screen. Unlike many games of the day, Chrono Trigger doesn't transition to a special battle screen. Instead, the game loads the battle screen over the field the characters met the enemy on. From my understanding, it was so difficult to script this battle engine because every fight had to be tailor-made for that specific battle, that Square has never tried to replicate this system ever again, and nor has anybody else that I know of. Since battles are normally initiated only when you confront enemies, the player can avoid many of the unnecessary battles by merely sneaking past enemies, which is very useful to the player who does not want to focus on leveling up characters, instead preferring to dig right into the story. Now, Chrono Trigger only requires about 20 hours to complete, but the game does offer multiple endings, and by making a New Game Plus, you're able to start the game with all the levels, items, and techniques your party had gained in your previous game. This helps you unlock the alternate endings and bonus features that were packed into the PlayStation re-release, as well as the later DS release. Now, on the subject of the game's music, I am not kidding when I say that despite being so old, Square still makes a lot of money off a soundtrack to this game. The music is some of the most memorable you'll ever find in any video game, ever. I believe one of the primary reasons this game is so beloved is because of the music that was composed for it. Every situation has appropriate music for setting the proper mood, and it really helps to pull you into the story on an emotional level. In closing, Chrono Trigger is one of my favorite games of all time, and I think should be required playing for anybody who really loves computer RPGs, because it really has a lot of really wonderful aspects to it. When I want to introduce someone to the genre, I always encourage them to try Chrono Trigger first. If you like Chrono Trigger, you'll probably like other computer RPGs, and it's an easy enough game that anyone can beat it. And even though it's a somewhat old game, perhaps retro to some people, I would still rank Chrono Trigger higher than many of the computer RPGs being released today. There was a lot of love put into this game, and it really shows.